I thought family was supposed to protect me, but the first time I saw myself in a video saying words I never spoke, my world cracked. At first, I believed it was a glitch, some internet trick, but then I saw my mother's message beneath it, daring me to share the lie. That was when I knew. It wasn't strangers out to destroy me. It was my own blood. And if they could twist my image, what else had they stolen? That question was the spark. And the truth was darker than anything I had imagined. On social media, my family looked flawless. Every holiday, my mother uploaded polished photos of long tables lined with food, cousins laughing in harmony, my parents smiling as if they'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. The captions glowed with hashtags like, "Cheer family first and blessed." When friends scrolled past, they saw stability, warmth, a dynasty rooted in love. But if you looked closely, I was barely there. In the Thanksgiving photo from last year, my figure was reduced to the edge of the frame, my face blurred by the dim lighting. At Christmas, I appeared as a reflection in the window, holding the camera no one thought to take from me so I could join the picture. I told myself it didn't matter, that my absence was an accident. I wanted to believe I belonged. Then the text arrived. A simple message from my mother, short and precise. "This Thanksgiving, we just want it to be Sophie and her family." Sophie, my sister, the golden child. My throat tightened as I read the words again. They didn't even bother with an excuse. Just a dismissal, like a door shutting in my face. For a moment, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they wanted a smaller gathering. Maybe the house was too crowded. I clung to explanations the way a drowning swimmer clings to driftwood. But beneath the surface, something cracked. When I called my mother to ask why, her voice was syrupy but sharp. "Oh, Evelyn, you're being too sensitive. We're just trying to avoid stress this year. You know how things get when you're around. It's easier if we keep it simple." Her words sliced me open and then dressed the wound with blame. Gaslighting had always been her language. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, waiting for some thread of reassurance. But none came. She only repeated, "Don't make this about you. We all need peace." I hung up, staring at the wall until the room swam. For years I had sacrificed, covering bills when Dad's job wavered, sending money when Sophie forgot her rent, being the one who never asked for anything in return. And yet, here I was, deemed the source of tension, the problem to erase. I wanted to believe it was temporary. A bad year, a misunderstanding, but a voice inside whispered otherwise. That night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop. Notifications buzzed from a family group chat I hadn't seen in weeks. Strange. I remembered being in that thread. Curious, I searched again. My name was gone. My stomach turned cold. They had made a new group chat without me. Through a cousin who forgot to silence her phone, I saw a glimpse of what I was missing. Photos of centerpieces being ordered, messages about catering, Sophie confirming guest lists. My mother's text chimed in, "It'll be perfect. Sophie deserves this after such a hard year." Laughter in emojis, inside jokes, plans unfurling like banners at a parade. I sat in the dark, staring at the glowing screen, my body hollow. They weren't keeping Thanksgiving small. They weren't avoiding stress. They were building a celebration without me. Every click revealed more. My father offering to buy extra wine. Sophie bragging about the custom cake. They were planning a grand feast, but to them, I was unnecessary weight. The invisible daughter. The one who didn't fit the picture. I scrolled until my vision blurred. My chest heaved with a mix of disbelief and recognition. It wasn't the first time they erased me. Childhood birthdays where Sophie's friends blew out my candles. Family trips where I carried bags while Sophie posed for photos. Compliments given to her while my efforts were ignored. But seeing it written, planned, executed in messages where my name didn't exist, that was a wound different from all the others. I closed the laptop, my reflection faint in the screen. My face looked older, tired, as though years of silence had etched themselves across my skin. A thought cut through me like a blade. I was never really part of this family's story. I was always just a supporting character in Sophie's spotlight. And then came the darker question, one that coiled tight in my chest. If they could so easily erase me from a dinner table, what else had they already erased me from? The thought lingered like smoke in a locked room. From the outside, my sister Sophie and I looked like any other siblings, two girls raised in the same house, two faces in the same family album. But in truth, we were raised in different worlds. From the time we were small, Sophie's world was wrapped in ribbons and glitter, while mine was built from leftovers and silence. I remember Christmas mornings where Sophie's pile of presents towered like a mountain, each gift wrapped in gold paper with bows that sparkled. My pile was smaller, 1 or 2 packages, practical things like socks or a book no one remembered to inscribe. When I asked why, my mother's reply was always the same. Sophie needs more. You'll understand when you're older. Birthdays carried the same story. Sophie had cakes tall as castles, candles glowing like a festival, friends gathered to sing her name. My birthdays were quieter affairs, sometimes forgotten, sometimes overshadowed by Sophie's latest achievement. "Don't make a fuss," my father would say. "You know Sophie has worked so hard." I worked just as hard, but my effort seemed invisible. It wasn't just the gifts or the parties. It was the way attention flowed. When Sophie walked into a room, faces lit up. When I entered, conversations barely paused. Relatives asked Sophie about her grades, her dreams, her plans. With me, they asked, "How's work?" and then moved on before I could answer. Even as a child, I felt the gap, the sense that my existence was optional. The isolation grew like ivy, slow but suffocating. At school, when I came home proud of a good grade, no one noticed. When I was sick, I stayed in my room with fever while Sophie received visitors bearing soup and flowers. I learned early to tend my own wounds, to celebrate my own victories in silence. Now, as an adult, I carry the memories like stones in my pocket. One evening, after the sting of being excluded from Thanksgiving, I opened the small jewelry box on my dresser. Inside lay a necklace, cheap silver, the kind that tarnishes after a few years. It had been a gift on my 12th birthday from an aunt who had since moved away. I held it up to the light, the metal catching faint reflections. For a moment, I asked myself, had anyone in this family ever truly loved me, or had they only tolerated me? The weight of the question pressed down, heavy and sharp. Tears blurred my vision. It was a moment of stillness, a pause in the chaos where grief and longing spilled freely. The necklace dangled from my fingers like proof of my invisibility. Days later, the next fracture appeared. I was at my desk, sifting through emails, when one popped up from my father. The subject line was blank and the message short. "We need to make sure Sophie is happy. Evelyn will be fine. She always is." The words struck like venom. He had meant to send it to my mother, but it landed in my inbox instead. I stared at the screen, reading the sentence over and over, as though repetition might dull the pain. Instead, it deepened it. "Evelyn will be fine." As if my needs, my life, my happiness were irrelevant. As if I was a piece on the board they could ignore because I never caused enough trouble to demand attention. Sophie had to be coddled, managed, adored. I had to survive quietly. I sat frozen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat against the words. Then a thought wormed its way in. If they could say this so casually, what else had they done in the shadows while assuming I wouldn't notice? My answer came sooner than expected. A week later, while helping my Aunt June organize old paperwork, I stumbled across a file folder marked Estate Planning. At first, I hesitated. It wasn't mine to read. But curiosity pushed me forward. Inside were drafts of my parents' will, documents I had never seen before. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, line after line, signatures in neat ink. And there it was, in black and white, nearly everything, property, savings, investments, was to be left to Sophie. My name appeared only once, attached to a token sum so small it felt more like an insult than inheritance. The room swayed around me. I had known I was overlooked, but this was more than neglect. This was erasure, deliberate and final. They weren't just excluding me from dinners or photographs. They were erasing me from the future, rewriting the family legacy as if I had never been born. I clutched the papers, heart racing, anger and grief battling inside me. For years, I had told myself the favoritism was bearable, survivable. But now, with the evidence in my hands, I saw the truth. This wasn't favoritism. It was a system, a calculated pattern designed to keep Sophie elevated and me diminished. The poison wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial, generational, written into law. I pressed the documents against my chest, fighting the urge to scream. My parents had built a golden cage for Sophie, lining it with gifts, applause, and inheritance. For me, they left only scraps, expecting me to endure silently. As I slipped the folder back into place, one thought crystallized, sharp and cold. If they could betray me in ink, they could betray me in anything. And in that moment, I realized I had been raised not in a family, but in a system designed to consume me. The nights grew longer after I discovered the will. Sleep abandoned me, leaving me wandering through rooms lit only by the glow of my laptop or the amber burn of a glass of wine. The taste turned bitter quickly, but I drank anyway, chasing numbness that never lasted. Each dawn arrived heavy, my body dragging forward, my mind replaying every slight, every message, every omission that had brought me here. On Thanksgiving, the day I was told not to come, I sat alone on my couch, scrolling through social media. There it was, the polished photo of my family gathered around the table, Sophie at the center, smiling like a queen crowned at her coronation. My parents flanked her, arms draped proudly, the caption beneath glowing, "Complete and happy." My throat constricted as I studied the picture. Every plate gleamed, every candle flickered perfectly. To the world, this was paradise, a home brimming with love. To me, it was proof that they had erased me not only from the table, but from the narrative itself. I kept staring until my eyes blurred, and that's when I noticed it. A comment buried among the flood of hearts and congratulations. Wish Evelyn was there too. It was from a distant cousin, someone who had seen the years of imbalance but never spoken. Before I could react, the comment vanished, deleted. I refreshed the page, but it was gone, as if I had imagined it. My parents hadn't just excluded me, they were vigilant enough to erase even the suggestion of my presence. I sat back, shaking, wine glass clutched like an anchor. The micro cracks in the illusion widened. My family's perfection was curated with ruthless precision, and I was the imperfection they refused to let anyone see. That night, the spiral deepened. I looked around my apartment and felt like an exile in my own life. The photos on my walls, graduation, first apartment, awards, looked hollow. Achievements without witnesses. I asked myself the question I had avoided for years. What if I walked away entirely? What if I cut them out the way they cut me out? The thought terrified me, not because of loss, but because of longing. Despite everything, my heart still ached for them, for the impossible possibility that one day they would turn, see me, love me as I had begged to be loved. The contradiction twisted inside me. Reason said abandon them, but the child within whispered, "Please don't leave me behind again." Days blurred. I drifted through the city like a ghost, carrying my grief through crowded streets. One evening, the snow began to fall. Flakes floated under streetlights, quieting the chaos of New York. I walked with no destination, coat wrapped tight, tears sliding hot before freezing in the wind. Each step crunched against the pavement, each breath clouded white. In that silence, I felt the ache of my existence. I was not part of them, yet I couldn't stop wanting to be. I paused at a bridge, watching the East River churn beneath the ice. The world was vast, endless, and I was a single flicker in it. For the first time, I admitted aloud, I don't know who I am without them. The words blew into the night, carried away by snow, leaving only the echo in my chest. It was a pause, a moment of stillness where the city's noise dulled and my sorrow breathed freely. I cried there until my body calmed, the snow melting into my tears until I couldn't tell which was which. And then, just as I was ready to turn back home, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, but the voice that answered was firm, professional. "Miss Carter, this is Martin Keller, your attorney. I wanted to inform you. The paperwork for the villa in Provence has been finalized. The property is officially yours." For a heartbeat, I couldn't comprehend it. A villa. In France. A piece of earth, of stability, of future that belonged solely to me. My breath caught, the city spinning around me. As the lawyer detailed the documents, the transfer, the keys waiting for me, one thought cut through the haze. While my family erased me from their legacy, I had quietly built my own. I ended the call, staring at the snow drifting down. The night felt different now, split between grief and possibility. My parents had chosen Sophie, but the world had offered me something else, a chance, perhaps, to choose myself. The cold bit into my skin, but warmth stirred in my chest. The contradiction remained, the longing remained, but so did this new truth. The story wasn't finished. The night of the lawyer's call stayed with me like a spark refusing to die. For weeks, I had drowned in grief, wandering through memories of absence and words sharpened into weapons. But standing in the snow, learning the villa in France was mine, something shifted. A single thought crystallized in the marrow of my bones. If they refuse to give me a place in their family, I will build one of my own. It wasn't rage alone that stirred me. It was clarity. I was tired of chasing their approval, tired of begging for scraps of belonging. I wanted to create a space that breathed warmth instead of performance, love instead of hierarchy. And so, the idea took shape. Thanksgiving. Not in their house, where I had been erased, but in mine. A table of my own, in the villa that symbolized independence, where no one would be left in the corner of a photo, no one would be erased from memory. I began writing invitations, not to my parents, not to Sophie, but to cousins who had whispered apologies, to family friends who had been discarded when they stopped serving my parents' narrative, to colleagues who had stood by me in silence. I even reached out to distant relatives, those who had been hurt, shamed, or sidelined by the system my parents curated. And of course, my Aunt June, whose presence had always felt like an anchor in the storm. The plan wasn't to retaliate with cruelty. The plan was to redefine family. My revenge would not be ice. It would be fire. A fire that lit warmth in those who had been left cold. A fire that showed the contrast between their hollow perfection and what love could truly look like. I decided this would be no ordinary gathering. If I was to rise from ashes, the feast had to reflect rebirth. I called a Michelin-starred chef recommended by a colleague in Paris. We spoke for hours about menus that blended tradition with elegance. Roasted duck glazed with lavender honey, pumpkin ravioli dusted with sage, wines chosen from the vineyards neighboring my new villa. When I hung up, my apartment felt transformed by anticipation. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a reclamation. Still, I knew secrecy would be impossible. If I wanted to break their illusion, the world had to see. So I took to Instagram, where for years I had been invisible. I posted a single image, a crystal glass of champagne catching sunlight, captioned with only 3 words, family. But chosen. The reaction was instant. Comments poured in from friends and distant connections. Some praised the elegance, others asked questions, but most simply echoed excitement. The image spread like wildfire, shared across stories, whispered in circles. People who had once overlooked me now leaned closer, wondering what I was building. One evening, scrolling through notifications, I caught Sophie's name among the viewers. My chest tightened. She had seen it. The thought of her reading those words, family, but chosen, felt like a strike against the fortress my parents had built. I imagined her showing it to them, their faces twisted in skepticism. Later, through a cousin's careless remark, I heard exactly what happened. Sophie had confronted them, suspicion in her voice. My parents had laughed, brushing it aside. "Evelyn!" my mother had scoffed. "She wouldn't dare. She doesn't have the courage for something like this." Their dismissal burned, but not in the way it once would have. For the first time, their doubt fueled me. They had always underestimated me, always assumed my silence meant surrender. This time, my silence was a weapon. While they scoffed, I built. I spent days planning every detail. Place cards handwritten in gold ink, musicians hired to play soft jazz through the evening, a long table in the villa's garden lined with candles and autumn flowers where no one would be pushed to the margins of a photograph. At night, I rehearsed speeches in my head. Not accusations, not venom, but truths about resilience, chosen bonds, and the power of creating something new when the old collapses. The irony didn't escape me. My parents believed revenge was destruction, but my revenge was construction. Their world was curated illusion, brittle and fragile. Mine would be built on something indestructible, genuine connection. Still, as I lay awake one night, staring at the glowing screen of my phone, a flicker of doubt whispered, "What if no one came? What if they were still too afraid of my parents' grip, too loyal to their illusion?" But then I remembered the cousin's deleted comment, "Wish Evelyn was there too." Someone had seen me. Someone had cared enough to risk saying it out loud, and that was enough to keep building. In the weeks before the feast, whispers spread. Friends reached out, confirming flights, sending excitement. My villa in France transformed from a distant dream into a living, breathing future. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for, anticipation, not dread. I walked through the empty villa one evening, light from the chandeliers scattering across marble floors. In the silence, I whispered, "This is where the story changes." My voice echoed back, steady and certain. Outside, the night was calm, but I knew storm clouds brewed in the distance. My parents would not ignore me forever, and when they realized what I was building, they would come, not with love, but with fury. The villa glowed with life. Candles flickered along the long outdoor table, strings of lights wound through the garden, and music drifted through the air, a gentle harmony of jazz and laughter. Guests poured in, cousins and colleagues and friends, their faces alive with something I had rarely seen in one place: genuine joy. Plates filled with roasted duck and ravioli, glasses clinked with champagne, and conversation hummed with warmth instead of judgment. For the first time in my life, I stood at the center of a family that felt real. My chest swelled as I looked around, no longer a shadow at the edge of photographs. Tonight, I was not invisible. Tonight, I was radiant. Phones rose to capture the moment, and soon clips began to trickle onto TikTok. By midnight, the hashtag #WarThanksgiving at Evelyn's villa was trending. Videos showed the laughter, the feast, the way people toasted to family chosen, not forced. Strangers online marveled at the beauty, praising the message behind it. My villa had become a beacon, the opposite of the cold perfection my parents flaunted. Somewhere across the ocean, I knew my parents and Sophie were watching. And then it happened. My phone buzzed with their names, call after call flashing across the screen. I set it down on the table, untouched. Guests noticed, their eyes flickering with curiosity, but no one moved to answer. The phones of others lit up too. My parents were trying every number they could reach. No one responded. For once, silence answered them. The calls stopped eventually, but unease rippled through me. They would not surrender quietly. I had drawn a line, and my parents had never tolerated boundaries. The next morning, the storm arrived. I was walking through the garden, the air still carrying traces of last night's wine and laughter, when my security detail approached. "Ms. Carter," one said carefully, "they're here." I looked to the gates and felt my stomach lurch. My parents and Sophie stood outside, their faces taut with fury and performance. They hadn't been invited, yet they had flown across the ocean, determined to reclaim control. My father's posture screamed authority, my mother's expression feigned grace, and Sophie, of course, clung to her role as the favored heir. They attempted to stride forward, but the guards held the line. "We're family," my mother snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. This is our gathering. I stepped closer, my heart hammering but my voice steady. No, I said softly but firmly. This is mine. You don't get to claim what you've denied me. The guards refused them entry. My parents' faces shifted from indignation to disbelief and finally to panic. For once, they weren't the hosts. They weren't in control. They were outsiders, blocked by the very walls they had once believed belonged only to them. Behind me, relatives watched from the villa's balconies. Some whispered, others recorded discreetly, their phones raised like witnesses in a courtroom. The illusion of the perfect family fractured in real time, their carefully curated image collapsing under the weight of reality. The final blow came when a cousin, perhaps emboldened by wine and vindication, began live-streaming the confrontation. Within minutes, the video spread online. The world watched as my parents argued at the gates, as Sophie demanded entry, as security stood firm, and I remained composed. The same platforms they had once used to erase me now carried proof of their exclusion. Comments flooded in. So this is the real family? Imagine raising a daughter just to deny her like this. The facade they had built over decades was unraveling, thread by thread, in the harsh light of truth. I stood still, breathing in the crisp air, aware of every eye on me. For the first time, it wasn't shame burning my skin. It was vindication. They could rage, they could demand, they could fly across the world uninvited, but the gates would not open. Not anymore. As the live stream count climbed and hashtags multiplied, I turned back toward the villa, my chosen family waiting inside. Behind me, my parents shouted, Sophie pleaded, cameras captured. In front of me, laughter, warmth, and belonging awaited. And as I crossed the threshold, one thought rang clear. They no longer owned the story. I did. In the days following the villa feast, the ripple effects spread faster than I could have imagined. My parents' calls to relatives went unanswered, their voices stripped of the authority they had once wielded like a weapon. The live stream from the gates had gone viral, replayed endlessly as an example of arrogance meeting its limit. For the first time, the wider family saw the truth, not the polished photos, not the staged smiles, but the reality of favoritism so toxic it had fractured the foundation of blood. Cousins who had once whispered apologies now spoke openly. Aunts admitted they had long suspected the manipulation, but never had proof until now. The tide shifted. People no longer defended my parents' version of events. Instead, they questioned the years of silence, the unequal treatment, the erasures that had gone unnoticed. My parents, once the hosts of every gathering, now sat in the uncomfortable position of being the spectacle themselves. And Sophie, my sister, my rival, my mirror, watched it all unravel. For years, she had basked in their favor, convinced her crown was permanent. But as the curtain fell, she saw the strings attached to her hands. She had not been cherished. She had been used. Her anger toward me dimmed, replaced by something she had never allowed herself to feel: shame. I saw it in her eyes the last time our gazes met across the gate, an unspoken recognition that she, too, had been trapped in their design. For once, she had no smirk, no taunt, only silence. One evening, after the noise had died down and the villa returned to quiet, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine. The horizon stretched wide, painted in hues of orange and violet as the sun dipped beneath the hills. A breeze carried the scent of lavender from nearby fields. I breathed deeply, letting my chest expand, letting my body settle. For the first time, my mind was not crowded with fear or questions. I was alone, but I was not lonely. The silence was no longer absence, it was peace. It was there, in that quiet moment, that the final clarity came. My parents' downfall was never the point. My victory was not their humiliation. It was my freedom. A week later, I opened my laptop and began to write. The words came easily, flowing as if they had been waiting for years, the thanksgiving that freed me. I wrote not about revenge, but about survival, about how a family's love should never be conditional, about how choosing yourself is sometimes the only path to healing. I told the story of exclusion, of the necklace from childhood, of the comment that vanished online, of the gates that finally closed to those who had once locked me out. When I published it, I expected little, but the post spread, shared across platforms, quoted in forums, read by strangers who wrote to me with their own stories. Messages arrived from people I had never met. Daughters who had been overlooked, sons who had been scapegoated, siblings who had been erased. "You gave me courage," one message read. "I thought I was alone," said another. My villa in France had become more than a home. It had become a symbol. The irony was not lost on me. For years, I had been invisible even in the middle of my family. Now, by telling my truth, I was seen by thousands. But visibility was not the prize. Connection was. The twist, the real one, came not from their downfall, but from my decision. I could have nursed the anger forever, let bitterness calcify into my identity. Instead, I chose release. Not forgiveness, not yet, but release. Hatred would tether me to them as surely as longing once had. To be free, I had to let go. So I did. The story did not close with me as a conqueror, standing coldly over the ruins of my family's image. It closed with warmth, with me gathering those who loved me without condition, friends who became sisters, colleagues who became brothers, neighbors who became kin. Around my new table, there were no blurred faces in photographs, no deleted names in group chats. There was laughter, unposed and unforced, and it was enough. I leaned back in my chair, looking around at the people who had chosen me and whom I had chosen in return. My parents' legacy was control, Sophie's legacy was envy, but mine would be something different. Rebirth. As the night deepened, I whispered to myself, steady and certain, I did not just survive. I was reborn, and this time I am truly free.